and kind folks out there, welcome to RPG with DBJ. I am your host, DBJ, and welcome to Discord Tuesday, the second day of our weekly demi-daily deep dive into one or more simple subjects. Today's subject is crises. Yeah. Not just today, but all week. We take a subject Monday through technically Thursday and take a little deep dive into it. I will talk about a few things that we talked about on Monster Monday, and then we will get right on into it. By the way, just to let you know, this show is simulcast over three platforms, so you may participate in those three platforms and both participating in live or afterwards using some other methods to find this channel, usually located below the video, as well as when you participate live, you can listen in on the Discord server, pop over to the Discord server and have lots of chats there, as well as YouTube and Twitch. Now, yesterday, we were talking about a crisis, and there is a term about never wasting a crisis, or actually, I believe it's more preferably referred to as never let a good crisis go to waste. And the idea behind that, and why I feel like we can use it for our tabletop games, is this idea that we can have dynamic things going on in the background of our tabletop RPG settings and use it as a go-to to make things very dynamic, memorable, ever-changing, and depending on what kind of crisis there is, it can actually be temporary if you're not someone who's into really changing the structure of your world. So, for example, you don't necessarily need to have an a zombie apocalypse or the battle of the gods overhead or the literal land that the people live on shattering or whatever. This crisis could be temporary, albeit something that is life-changing as well. A particularly nasty harvest and famine, brought up a lot of natural disasters, whether it's overwhelming heat, mudslides, tornadoes or hurricanes, and early and often snow or frost, things of that nature. And then you can also have things modifying those particular events, whether they are arcane, such as the battle of gods, the storming of giant kaiju or monsters. Maybe there's a plague sweeping the land. There could be a portal opening to another world, and various dangerous things are sweeping through. Or maybe it just happens to be a season of forest fires, or the overabundance of a particularly nasty creature like giant insects or ankhegs, or something that's come from underneath the ground, or creatures flying through the air, maybe flocks of wyverns or something of that nature. But why I feel like this is a great tool to put in our tool belt when it comes to being a world creator is that life still goes on. And we talked yesterday about the people who tend to be the users and abusers when a crisis is going on, and talked a little bit about some of the heroes that step forward in these situations. They make really great NPCs, and I think in many ways there's even a possibility of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, or put a different way, because we're talking about a crisis, the stressed individual and the other and myself being stressed become allies, maybe temporarily. The old hag that's out in the swamp comes into town because even her swamp is drying up because of the overwhelming heat wave that's coming through, and she doesn't want to die. Remember, most creatures don't want to fight to the death, and matter of fact, a lot of them, especially if they have some intelligence, want to live, and so maybe they become a temporary ally, despite the fact that people are reading the monster manual and going, aren't they chaotic evil? And it's like, yeah, they're chaotic evil when it suits them. But if they have some intelligence, even temporarily, sure, they might take advantage of stealing some food or supplies when the time is needed. But they also understand the importance of the lots of evil things understand the importance of kindness and organization amongst other people to benefit themselves. Much like your local television police procedural, it's not criminals that want everyone else to be criminals. It's like, we want to be criminals. We want you to stick to your honor and truth and judgment, right? So that we can take advantage of it. So in many ways, I could see there being strange bedfellows during a crisis. Also, the using a crisis as a backdrop allows you to have a very easy go-to when you're stuck for ideas. So, for example, the countryside is okay. There are wyverns that have overbred for some reason, and they're just on random happenstance. They're flying through the air and they're snatching up livestock and travelers on the road, and they are landing on top of battlements and those kind of things. And so people are panicked, but maybe it's not stopping. This might be a crisis that a player character can't draw their sword and beat it about their head and shoulders. This happens to be a thing that, especially if they are very much low level, the idea of having a backdrop with wyverns or even dragons or something sweeping through the landscape and destroying cities, or snatching up livestock and flying hundreds of miles away or something, and the PCs just happen to be there without being able to do anything about it. Yeah. yeah. Jay, someone in the chat brings up like an EMP, like an electromagnetic pulse in a modern day, or hell, maybe some kind of EMP equivalent even in the arcane society that somehow disrupts magic or something. So those kind of things could happen, but they also, like I said, it can be a tool in your back pocket by not having that be the main thrust of the story. Maybe there is, of course, you have your typical flocks of wyverns. Hey, random NPCs, protect this caravan. But it could be searching for a murderer. It could be going into an old crypt. It could be sailing across a strait or something to get to an island. It could, you can still have your typical dungeon delving. You can still have some of your other adventures. You can make it very personal, and the PCs may be have traveled very far away from home, and instead they want to travel back to their homelands and have some kind of interaction with their loved ones, maybe hoping that they're safe. There's the possibility of reconnecting with a particular faction or society that the PCs have left, and so that may be the thrust of the adventure. And oh, by the way, it just so happens that there are these creatures flying overhead. Yeah. Mr. Spins, Gaz says there are kinds of crises. A technological crisis, the wide-scale malfunction of a particular piece or kind of technology upon which some pillar of society rests. Like if the steam engine went on the fritz during Western expansion in the U.S. And I would say plain old electricity, the internet today, right? Yep. Financial crisis, when a nation or organization has a sudden loss of a large amount of money, which cripples their function and the bodies which rely on them. Such as the king is bankrupt and begins a regime of crippling taxes. The party is assailed by tax collectors. We talked about that kind of crisis yesterday, where the price or availability of goods and services may spike and or disappear. It's also possible that there's some kind of strange strange to do. Like, for example, everyone's walking around 10-foot poles, and 10-foot poles now cost 75 gold pieces for some reason. And PCs are like, what the hell? Like, why is there a run on 10-foot poles or something? I'm being facetious, but in making fun of the run on toilet paper, right? It may not make sense, but the collective society and mob may put a value on something much higher than it is temporarily, because everyone else thinks it's a rare commodity, especially if it's something like a that it gives us brings to the population health and safety, whether that health and safety is true or not. It could be holy items, or holy water. It could be a certain type of clothing item. It could be some kind of plant or plant derivative that someone feels may be a bane against maybe a disease or something, things like that. And of course, stealing the hell out of a lot of food and stuff. Purple Worm Podcast. Hello there, Purple Worm. If you would like to join the Discord, please do so. You could drop some of your information in there, Purple Worm Podcast. And good morning to yourself as well. Natural crisis, earthquakes, pyroclastic explosions, volcanic eruptions, flood storms, typhoons, yep, famines, sinkholes open to the underdark, yeah. Trademark. I like that. Crisis of malice. Any of these crises which is inflicted intentionally by a party, person, or nation upon a region, organization, or nation. Oh, okay. Okay. You're fine there, Purple Worm. The a crisis of malice can come about from a rival nation without having some kind of technological or arcane power, by removing goods or services from another nation, right? So, for example, during flood season, maybe it's okay. I don't know how this would apply to a fantasy realm, but okay, during flood season, people are known to put up sandbags or something, let's say, in their community, and then the neighboring community is like, yeah, we're not going to help you with that. And I know we've got all the sand and the barriers and things you need for your flood, but yeah, we're not doing that. And oh yeah, the operation of the levees, yeah, we're not going to do that either. So a rival nation could make a crisis of malice by denying another group the normalcy that normally comes from them being allies or something. Also, a crisis of conflict, like the Mongol horde shows up at your border and kindly demands everything. Yeah. I would even include in there a crisis of faith. And this could apply to religious organizations, but I also think it could be the idea that there is a crisis simply because people know that there's a change coming along. Red Dice Diaries. Hey, what's going on there? Working from home, so thought I'd sign in for a listen. Well, thank you very much for allowing me to and the rest of us to be in your ear hole there, sir. I appreciate it. This week we're talking about the idea of using a crisis in our tabletop role-playing games. And now today is Discord Tuesday, and although Discord Tuesday is a grab bag, we tend to, or we, meaning me, tends to default to some mechanics that we can use. Yesterday was Monster Monday. We talked about a number of things. Yeah, Gaz says, God falls from the sky. The OG crisis of faith. Yeah, when the gods die, what the hell happens? And how does the population learn about it? Or the faithful, reach their hands up to the sky to be given yet another instruction by godly forces, and the voice goes silent. We've seen this happen when it comes to angelic figures in novels and graphic novels and television and movies and things, right? It's the war of the angels against the demons, but the angels stop hearing the voice of God, and what do? One of my favorite movies, Prophecy, dealt with that, and do you continue the war or not? I love that idea. Now, like I said, the great thing about having a crisis in your setting, whatever that crisis may be, like I said, it doesn't need to be permanent. It could be a very temporary thing, but you can always drop back to it to, again, a big thing that I'm a proponent of is to have a tension timer, and using like some kind of pressure or tension to move the party, especially when they get really, they get really stale. They get into some analysis paralysis when they're deciding on what actions they should take. And I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's something from Hollywood that says, when things get boring, have people break in the door and start shooting the place up. Essentially, what you can do is, like I threw together off the top of my head, like there are wyverns sweeping through the land and they're snatching, random passersby and livestock. When your PCs are getting bored or something, the wyverns land on the roof of the tavern and start ripping at the tavern top. Or someone walks outside the tavern and gets snatched up by a wyvern, and the PCs are like, we were thinking about traveling to the Isle of Dread. How do we get there? Are you going to step outside? That kind of thing. Yeah, Red Dice says, I know Bruce Cordell did a swords and sorcery book for 3.5 called When the Sky Falls that has some good ideas for disasters in it. That was based on an idea of, what if a meteorite crashed into your campaign world? Exactly, that's exactly what I'm talking about. The meteorite crashing into your game world could be like dinosaur, wiping out society meteorite, or maybe a meteorite just happens to crash. And again, a crisis of, going back to the crisis of faith, the sky is falling kind of idea could be the kind of thing that you may want to add to your world. Maybe people start questioning their place in the world, especially if a new race of beings exists in the world, such as tiefling, dragonborn, some strange other types of races you introduce to your world that starts to change how people think of themselves and their place in it. What happens there, of course, we talked yesterday about the con artists, the cults and the cults of personality that pop up by the people who pretend to know what's going on, and people falling for it because they want a sense of normalcy to return, whether there's a 1% chance that normalcy is really there or not. Yeah, you guys yesterday brought up the idea of like the ticket to the Ark idea, where there is a place of safety. It could be on a very large boat, underground, behind castle walls or whatever, and the ticket to get there is pretty expensive, financially or morally or something like that. Gaz says, what if gods aren't fixtures of your world and are just beings with nearly incomprehensible lifespans? When they die, their essence rains down into the world like a meteor shower, becoming tangible pieces of divinity, which can be gathered, granting great power in single pieces, or full godhood when all are brought together. Yeah. Yep. Oh, I could imagine that being, well, of course, I could see that being in the brand new economy, although some would say, like, don't touch that, that's part of the gods. Yeah, a life, James says, a life for your life, that's usually the cost of getting on the ark, right? Giving up your life, however you measure your life, physically, psychologically, ethically or morally, that kind of thing. And there's a role-playing game, Within the Ring of Fire, which where gold had come from the blood of a slain god, and so people considered gold to be pieces of divinity from this godling, and people wouldn't take gold as a monetary standard in many places because of that. Now, the other thing about a crisis is that you could You can also turn the dial up and down based on whatever that crisis is. So, for example, in our own world, when it comes to, say, weather events, right? There's a there's a during, and then there's a post weather event. I'll say situational hazards that happen. And so you can modify those quite a bit. For example, if everyone knows that it's hurricane season, people might start to think, people will start running around to batten down the hatches. Here in the middle of the United States, there, hurricanes, tornado season, and the states that are known to be in tornado alley. Everyone knows, this is tornado season. Hurricane season happens in the Caribbean, and I'm gonna guesstimate between like May and October, May to September, there is a hurricane season. And so that's why some people who go cruising here in the States actually go during those times, because the price is cheaper, because the people who have the money and wherewithal and the time don't cruise during hurricane season. And so there is this like there's a tension in the air when these seasons happen. They know things are about to happen, and so they batten down the hatches. They start to gather their supplies, their families. Maybe lots of messages are flown on ravens to distant lands or something like that. In a sci-fi world, maybe there's far more security. Individuals who are particularly skilled in taking care of habitats are needed to do things. Maybe there's lots of security in terms of not just like criminal things, but making sure that all the safety things are measures are redundant because of it's solar flare season or something like that, or I don't know, comets are going to pass by, or those micrometeorites are that pass by every 87 days have made a loop around the sun, and they're going to come back towards our habitat or something. Again, I'm just pulling things out of my ass, but you get the point, right? So there is a predisposition to people that you can use, and then of course there's the crisis itself, and people running around with their heads cut off. The panic that happens when the people who felt like, nah, this isn't a big deal, and realize they're wrong. There's the people who over-prepped, who are like, wagging their fingers and say, I told you so, and don't come after my food because I'm sitting on my porch with a shotgun. There are going to be the people who are, despite the crisis maybe happening on a semi-regular basis, they're going to be the individuals who are saying, oh, this is the end, and you might as well give up now because this will be the end. You'll have all of that. And then, of course, there's the post portion of it, the damage done, the people displaced, the relationship with the ones who attempted to connive and steal and rob and manipulate others during this time. And now what do? Much like there was I remember seeing a comedy video of the day after the purge, and the two co-workers that now have to go back to work and work with each other after one tried to purge the other one during purge day. And the one guy's like, don't take it to heart. That was just for purge. I mean, you're not gonna have any hard feelings about this, are you? And the other employee is like, yeah, okay, wait till next year. Red Dice Diary says it's an interesting thought. Obviously, people have built fallout shelters and the like in the real world. What about a fantasy world where actual dragons exist? Perhaps surface races might move underground. I think that was sort of what happened with the old Earth Dawn game. I'm not familiar with the Earth Dawn setting, but why not? Why not have, underground shelters? And maybe those underground shelters, maybe it's possible underworld races kind of rent out the underground shelters because of a deal, meaning that your drow, your dwarves, and things like that have these underground shelters, and during the migration of the dragons, right? And maybe the migration of the dragons is the crisis that happens. That, hey, all you got to do is just stay out of their way, go underground. When you see the flocks coming, just make a run for it, and they'll just fly overhead. No big deal, right? But the PCs need to be above ground, or maybe they go underground and they're trapped in an underground community with some of their enemies, but everyone knows that there's like a treaty when the surface races go into these underground shelters and there's no crime, like, because everybody will jump on you if you exert like violence or theft or something like that. Yeah, I love the Purge series too there, Jay. Red Dice says, you can imagine all the current underground races having to cope with an influx of surface refugees. Yeah, even if it's temporary, the underground races are like, why are they coming here? Although some of the more reasonable ones might be like, the Myconids over in the corner are like, you guys go to the surface and raid them quite a bit, so yeah, don't act like you're innocent. Yeah, and maybe that's the reasoning why the subsurface races raid the surface realm in the first place. To their It's like their comeuppance, their it's their, you came at us, so now we're coming at you kind of thing, whether it's reasonable or not. So the another thing that we can do when it comes to having a crisis, something that I've brought this game up before, and I got to bring it up again. And Red Dice says, love the idea of Myconids as the moral compass of the underworld. Yeah, they're minding their own business, like, there they go again. Just rolling their mushroom eyes, gathering together in like their mushroom. What is it? The hive-minded kind of thing. Talking to each other, tisking the whole time. When I was younger, I used to raid the surface, but not anymore. Anyway, I think they only lived like 20-something years. Yeah, Tesla says the Earth Dawn, the fourth world, is in the same timeline as Shadowrun, the sixth world. Yeah, I remember that they are connected in some manner, but in a way, Shadowrun is the end result of a particular crisis that happened. Now, people adapted to it, and they adapted to it to make it the Shadowrun world. But before it became Shadowrun, it was the awakening of magic. So that pretty much counts in it. I mean, really, any post-apocalyptic setting falls under this, but I'm relating this to something that happens not just in the background, but use it as a tool in your back pocket to use whenever you're like, man, my world sound is starting to feel like generic, fantasy. How do I change it? And, change it with a crisis, and change it with a crisis that happens like normally, Now, if you want to go extremely arcane, you can absolutely do that. And so we can flow into some mechanics after I read this comment. Gaz says, quote, they aren't sending their best folks. Hundreds of orcs, elves, humans. These people are barbarians, marauders, vegetarians. So I told the dwarves and drow, I told them we need to build a wall. Yeah. Oh, hilarious, right? The humans invading the goblinoid lands or something, and the goblinoids are bugbears looking at each other like, huh? They're coming here for some reason? Yeah. Yeah, that would be vegetarians. I love it. I love that. So now for some mechanics, I'm going to bring up a game known as Blades in the Dark. Now, mind you, you don't have to have the game, but one thing that we can do when it comes to a crisis is establish some kind of mechanics in terms of having a relationship with the things around you. Now, the relationship could be in terms of resources, right? It can be it could be used in terms of of reputation. Maybe in a particular world, we last week we talked about knights. It could be something that has to deal with honor and your, a personal honor. And so having some kind of measurement to measure how many supplies or resources or food items or trade items people have, you could very much, it could change the way the PCs interact in the world. So let's say there's some kind of a natural crisis and they're going along in, they're walking along or something. They've got a couple of wagons or maybe a couple of mounts, and they come upon a small town that's got walls up and defenders. And they're like, what are you doing here? And the PCs say, hey, we got some trade items. And so maybe they have some spices to trade. Maybe they have some pieces of equipment, chickens, or whatever the case may be. And so those items might not just be for barter purposes, but safety purposes to show your value and worth in a world where things might be extremely scarce. Tesla brings up Dragonlance. There's the main cataclysm in which a mountain of fire, Word of God says it was a meteor, annihilated the kingdom of Istar and killed millions outside of it with fire, earthquakes, etc. Yeah, earthquakes, volcanoes, meteor strikes, and things of that nature. Not only could it destroy, let's say, the capital of your society, throwing everyone else into chaos, right? Let's say there's a centralized government in your world that's been stretched thin, and then like some kind of cataclysm destroys it. A Pompeii, striking of a meteor or a comet or something of that nature. The eruption of a volcano, a great earthquake swallows the capital city and throws everything into chaos. And of course, all the refugees and wild animals that flee from a region like that. But anyway, it goes on to say, on the same day, Taladas, or maybe Taladas, Taladas, the continent to the northeast of Ansalon, suffered the great destruction in which an earthquake wiped out the mighty Arim Empire and filled the interior of the continent with molten lava and poisoned gas. I love it. In Atlatum, the third continent, the catalysm came in the form of the Great Drowning, in which massive tidal waves flooded large parts of the land and never receded. I love the idea of land destruction because it makes a great excuse for having dungeon delving. If you are a person who's like anti-dungeon, if you're an anti-dungeon delver and you're like, I'm not one of those, kick in the door and steal their stuff kind of people. I love role playing. I'm more of a dramatic role player or something like that. Well, during a catalyst, or some kind of cataclysm or crisis or something, especially during the after effects, or even during natural weather events, there are looters, there are people trapped in locations. So you can have dungeon delving, although it would be done in a different manner. For example, the idea of the major center of society and the PCs need to go in to rescue survivors of a particular noble family, or to they're thieves and they want to get the crown jewels that might be left there, in the main keep of the nobles who probably died because of the, I don't know, necrotic fires that fell from the sky or something like that, right? And there is a possibility that, there is some kind of dungeon delving, basically picking your way through the destruction of what was normally modern day society. As a matter of fact, I remember a third edition, 3.x edition setting where they had people known as rafters, and there was this city, like basically a towered city. It was basically a big wall, and there were dozens of levels to the city built on top of the destruction of the old city below it. And there were people known as rafters that went down into the bowels of the city, and there were literally like towers and things like that. Some of them even flipped on their side and across huge crevices and things of that nature. And so there were people who were diving down deep into the nether parts of the city, for no other reason than to gather old books or treasure or old scrolls of magic and things like that. I'm not going to hit the meme there, Gaz, but funny. Not at least not yet. Now, another mechanical aspect to having a crisis, of course, is the crisis itself. Do you want to use it as a random encounter idea? I know that we are in a gaming we're in the part of the gaming circle where there's random encounters have been pushed way to the side, and people are like, "Oh, random encounters suck or they're stupid." And for me, part of the idea of random encounters, of course, is lots of people think random encounters are taking a random encounter table that has nothing to do with your setting and then overlaying it into your world. And that's not how you use random encounters at all. As a matter of fact, it behooves you to make your own random encounter tables or reskin the ones that you have available if you don't want to go through that process to have every random encounter be a descriptor in your world, because that's really what random encounters are. They are setting material. Now, the setting material can be random, but the material within those random encounters should be something that's in your world. For example, if I tell you there are nomads riding on giant scorpions, another random encounter could be a sandstorm or a dust devil. Another random encounter could be sidewinder snakes, giant, of course, or cobras. Maybe another random encounter are jackals, and an oasis might be another random encounter. Maybe, okay, and then maybe let's add in like a caravan of camel riders, right? And now, using all those descriptions, right? Giant scorpions, sandstorms, giant sidewinders or cobras, camel riders. You know where you're at, right? You're in a desert, and the thing is that how the PCs act and or react to those random encounters is based on your setting. Now, when it comes to a crisis, something that's I don't know, the blood of the gods falls from the sky and has some kind of effect. The bits and pieces of maybe there literally is an ongoing battle with the gods, and various from the conflict in the wounds that are happening above in the sky has a random effect on the ground. Bolts of lightning, the blood of the gods dropping down and becoming living creatures, the literally the footsteps of the gods slamming down on the earth, causing earthquakes and mountains to shatter or something like that. It might be something more mundane. Let's say you're in the wintry season and it's come soon and early and rough, and so a random blizzard or frigid cold or anything like that happens along, and so you can randomly have those things happen. Now, of course, how random is based on the people involved and the GM and things like that. Are you doing this like, are you going with the prototypical like once an hour? Are you doing this when the PCs are in places that are not safe? So it requires the PCs to travel from safe haven to safe haven in a very quick manner to avoid these hazards, whether it's like acid rain or those flocks of wyverns I brought up earlier or something. So that depends on how you want to reskin, reflavor, or reuse the things around you. Maybe there are arcane storms, and the very spells that the PCs have access to are randomly sweeping through the countryside in various shapes or forms. Meaning, like, please, someone in the chat, please put this in. What's the healing spell that is like a spirit or something that remains in one location, and if you pass through the region of the spirit, you get healed? There's also the flaming sphere spell, and things of that nature. Hell, lightning bolts and fireballs and things like that might you pick a bunch of them. I mean, you could easily pick like a D20, right? Hell, you could do a percentile table of picking 100 different spells if you really want to, if you want to go through that much detail. But again, maybe these things are spawned randomly and in random locations or something, or they are drawn by the arcane power of those who have attachments to such a thing. So if any of the PCs attempt to use any arcane abilities, all of a sudden these chaos storms, or at least the results of these chaos storms, start flowing towards the PCs in a random manner, and they're like, "We need to get out of here." And like, I know, but I use the invisibility spell so we can sneak past those goblinoid armies and stuff. They're like, "Yeah, but you shouldn't have done that. We could have just stayed in the woods or something." And of course, they start running as, I don't know, the however you want to describe the power, whether it's the weave or it looks like smoke, or a single ball of energy like a will-o-wisp begins, and no one knows exactly what might happen when it appears. Or maybe there are certain telltale traits of the magic that the PCs can go after. So the color of the energy is white. It's healing. It's radiant energy. Let's see if we can get healed by this thing, while we're going through the countryside or something. But again, using those, whether it's a random event or it could be an if-then kind of status. I use the if-then, where if you cast magic or if you travel through this region, then a particular thing may happen to you as well. Whether you're using like a natural disaster, like let's say during a hurricane or tornado season, there's debris that's flung through the air. Tornadoes can randomly touch down through a region. They can sweep through an area and cause all kinds of destruction, meaning like secondary destruction, like, of course, thrown debris, individuals lifted into the air, rooftops ripped off. In a modern setting, fires start, so I could see fires starting in the fantasy realms as well. In a sci-fi setting, the same thing could happen where it comes to like solar winds or solar flares, or maybe there's some kind of strange gravitational pulses or things like that. And of course, you have anything from EMP pulses, knocking out the power inside of a habitat or a starship, to losing communications, to gravity being altered, to navigation systems being going out of whack if they are traveling through a particular region, so on and so forth, right? People that are doing a spacewalk getting irradiated, and you have to worry about their radiation poisoning if that's a threat in a sci-fi world, or even certain types of life forms stimulated, made aggressive due to certain external things, whether it's like high frequency sound, radiation, electrical discharges, exposure to methane, or alcohol pools, or methane gases, or heavy CO2, like in Venus or something like that. So those may be things where they are situational mechanisms. Lastly, I say, for a mechanical purpose as well, there may be some resources that you can derive from a crisis that normally aren't available in the normal period of time. Those flocks of wyverns flying overhead, maybe there's poison you can acquire from their stingers. Maybe you can acquire their flesh or their meat to be sold or traded, or heck, even used as a bane against others of its kind, whether it's turned into an oil and lit on fire so that they smell the smoke and they realize that it's them, and they go away, much like using the urine of a predator to scare away either other predators or prey creatures and things of that nature. So there may be other resources that are available as well. And I would say, I guess, if your setting is built around a crisis, much like the idea of most post-apocalyptic settings. It could be that Jay says healing spirit was a spell. I was thought I was wrong, but I was mistaken about the healing spirit, because I was like, is healing spirit? I don't know. Yes, healing spirit is a spell, which could be, instead of always making randomized encounters always being bad, which doesn't necessarily need to be a thing. If you have random spell effects happening out in the countryside or something, a random healing spirit might benefit the player characters, as opposed to that healing spirit maybe, I don't know, the chaos magic is so bad that like, all right guys, this radiant power could very easily change into something like necrotic, or on fire or frozen or something like that. So you got to hurry up. And one of the PCs jumps to the healing spirit and it turns into a big flaming sphere or something like that randomly or whatever. I mean, but if I were to do something like that, that's how I would flavor it, using what we already have in our 5th edition game or whatever other game you have. Also, mechanically speaking, grabbing onto those if you've ever wanted to be the person that's like, you know what, I never get a chance to use the sanity rules in my game, but you're like, I don't really run a horror game, but I really do want to use the sanity rules. This is a good way to do it. And instead of having it be Lovecraftian horror, you could make it essentially mental stress, right? So instead of the PCs running, wandering through a region and you see a bunch of, I don't know, dead people, make a sanity check, and then the flock of wyverns come crashing down on you, make a sanity check, right? Maybe this is more of a time standard, meaning like the longer the PCs go without finding a stable place to be, the greater chance from the things that they see and encounter causing them more mental stress, which instead of driving them just insane, it would make them want to sit down and give up, because they understand they're a small cog in a big wheel. And so instead of like horror where they're like screaming and yelling and want to run and pee themselves, maybe this is a longer form of like just basically a mental stress, the idea that despair really comes upon a person by them walking through this crazy world. A good example of this would be in the movie Mad Max Fury Road. Well, the other Mad Max movies as well. But the idea that they even say in Fury Road that an insanity has kind of like permeated the landscape, the people there, just grasping onto the last straws of humanity, if there was any left in many of these people, which, explains the idea of people spraying chrome spray paint in their mouth and wanting to go to Valhalla by, the war boys leaping off of one vehicle to another with explosives in their hands and things like that, right? So, and Max was not immune to such things either, having traumatic flashbacks. And so, yes, you could make it very personal if you want to use those insanity rules. So it's not a matter of like a random insanity, but someone could have guilt over leaving their loved ones behind, or not being there fast enough when the small child got snatched away in the storm, or having nightmares of the individual that slipped out of their grasp as the ground opened up during one of the earthquakes and swallowed them down into, the pits of darkness or something like that. And just kind of like reflavor, reskin it, make it personal, and make it something like that. Red Dice Diary says, this is something the Fate system handles well, especially, essentially you have two types of hit points, or stress as the game calls it. One is physical and the other is mental. When your mental stress has deteriorated, you acquire negative aspects. As a consequence of this, that can complicate the game for you in interesting ways. I love consequences, and I love aspects and things of that nature. Absolutely, I think Dungeons and Dragons as a game has tried to include this when it comes to ideals, bonds, flaws. And so you could have this thing where the PCs gain replace new traits on their character over a period of time before it becomes very negative. Or you could have losses of, instead of just losses of hit points, again, like you said, stress in Fate, having losses of, say, mental stats also works. Now, just as a little plug here, in the cinematic environments that we've written here with Critical Hit, we have mental exhaustion. It's basically a despair chart, and much like physical exhaustion in 5th edition, where it's like you're at exhaustion like level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we have the same thing, 6 levels of mental despair, and then they have different traits related to which level of despair you are at. So, just much like physical exhaustion, you have reduction in movement, reduction in speed, eventually to you're so exhausted that you can't move. The same thing is more mental, where you have reductions in, say, perception and initiative, and of course your mental stats like charisma and wisdom and intelligence, things like that. And it moves up and down. So that's just a little plug aside. Now, another way of having some kind of mechanical effect on this as well is if you're not really someone who loves the exploration pillar of gaming, and you're talking to the wrong guy here. I love exploration, but if you're someone who like really wants to hand wave it, but you still want to have like the dangers involved in it, you could instead do like a skill challenges. And based on the region that they are, so like for example, maybe the mountainous region or the desert is far more dangerous than, say, the open plains or going through a major city, right? So you could give them different levels of difficulty to go through areas, and then have, depending on how far they travel, base that on how many successes they have. So let's say the travel from Absalon to the to the region of the border of, I don't know, Dalthar or whatever, right? I don't, just making that up. So they go from Absalon to Dalthar, and they need 5 successes to get there. And so they have to use their, survival or nature or different traits thereof, or maybe they're like, if you go through the mountains, you guys are gonna, who has the highest athletics check or something, or maybe even go with the lowest, who has the lowest check, with help from one of your compatriots, and if you get 5 successes, there's nothing happens to you. But for each failure, when you arrive, maybe there's some kind of loss or something, whether that loss could be through equipment, loss of statistics, meaning through like exhaustion or pain, or harm or damage or something. And maybe when they arrive there, they do have levels of exhaustion or what have you. So you could do it very abstractly by having essentially skill checks, and you can even role play those skill checks as well. You go through the mountains on the border of Dalthar, make a skill check, to athletics check to climb through the high mountain peaks or whatever. And okay, then the PCs could like kind of half role play going through. Maybe there's even some people that live up in the mountains who are very protective of their stuff. You made a successful skill roll. Okay, guys, you make it through, but you also met these villagers that live up there in the mountains, and so forth, right? So you could very much abstract some of the survival it takes to get through a particular region. And of course, failure could just be time scale. So in order to get from one place to another, they need to get this, to get to the border of Dalthar, they need to get there in 3 days. But the PCs have failed twice, adding 2 more days to their travel, so they get there in 5 days, knowing abstractly that the danger has increased over the 2 days that they were waylaid from getting lost, or the weather got worse, or those damn flock of wyverns that keep popping up again. They took shelter from them, or they were attacked by the same wyverns, but they fought them off and whatnot. So you could very much describe it that way as well. So again, and I keep saying that over and over. Having a crisis in your world is a great tool to use. It's a great way to throw a monkey wrench into your world if you're kind of like tired of it, you're a little bored with it, and you go, yeah, I wanted this to be unique, but it just feels like generic or something. Throwing a crisis in there is good. As a matter of fact, if your PCs are like, hey, we all saw a brand new movie, or we read a book, or there's this graphic novel, or there's a brand new video game out, wouldn't it be cool if we inserted this thing? And you could go, yeah, let's insert the thing into the world. Let's insert the chaos storms. Let's insert the zombie horde. Let's insert that as a temporary change to your setting if you really love your setting, right? Maybe the zombie horde, like a 28 days later, maybe the zombie horde only exists for 28 days until they end up dying, basically burning themselves out. So temporarily, there's a big old zombie horde, but maybe over time, if given enough time, if people can hunker down and survive, maybe it passes over. Much like we hope today that a viral outbreak will pass over us. So yeah, there is a possibility that in many ways we very much could use this idea that maybe we can use a crisis and use it in our back pocket, and let's not be afraid to throw a monkey wrench into the world that our PCs are in, especially if we make it personal. So tomorrow is World Building Wednesday, and of course we're going to design a world where a crisis is going on. Now this is going to be up to you guys what kind of crisis is happening. Maybe we do a grab bag of crises, much like the crisis in Dragonlance, where you have floods and lava and earthquakes or things. Maybe we have like an apocalyptic crisis. So maybe there's a combination of like plague, flood, fire, I don't know, death of the gods and the comets or something, and nuclear war. And what are some other existential threats to what are like looking up like the top 10 ways Earth and society and life will pass away. Maybe we could pull off of that. Red Diary says, well, I know what I'll be listening to whilst working at home. I love that word, whilst. I never get to use it in my common parlance, but I love the fact that you do. I actually hear your voice in my head when you type out things, because it sounds exactly as how you sound there, dude. So guys, anyway, by the way, thank you guys very much. And as an aside, please check out Red Dice Diaries, both the Purple Worm podcast and the YouTube channel Red Dice Diaries. There is great entertainment and knowledge to be found there. Ooh, I got a bot. Wow. I feel really good about that. Tesla Ranger pops in. Apocalypse How. A catastrophe occurs on a scale anywhere between localized and the destruction of reality itself. Apocalypse How TV tropes. Ooh, we'll pull that up tomorrow and use that as our way to create this world building where there's a crisis. Although it would be kind of funny for the PCs to be in like the one safe place in the center of the world, and all of the different crises are happening like a spoke in a wheel. I mean, like the spokes of a wheel in different places. Like, well, to the northeast there's volcanoes, and to the south there's radiation, and there's nanotech swarms to here, and there's also plagues to this place. Yeah. Oh, how about multiple realities campaigns all collapsing into each other? I like that a lot. Yeah, you're like, it's the comic book version of we've got too many realities, and we got too many characters and stuff, right? And they're like, let's just destroy them all and smash them together. Yeah, I like that. Yep, Crisis on Infinite Earths. Yep. D&D, the new 52. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining me. I'll be in the Discord temporarily, and for some reason, I'm not having any sound. So anyway, stage 10 is not working very well for me today. I'm not exactly sure why. So guys, everyone, have a great one. Thank you very much for participating today. And if you're home, you're bored, maybe you need to find something to lull you to sleep, or anything thereof, please stop by again, Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. my time, but of course it would be different for you, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here on this channel, Monday through Friday. And please join in for future Fridays as well, where we talk about anything and everything transhumanism in the tabletop RPG games, especially related to Eclipse Phase and Altered Carbon RPGs. So anyway, guys, have a great one. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.